Italy, we have Secretary General Francesca Evangelisti and also Silvia Baldassare. And a warm greeting also to the Italian delegation with us. And from Portugal, we have Secretary General Ezequiel Duarte, that you also know from yesterday. Thank you for all the work of these 3 chapters. I will now call to the floor the Secretary General of France, David Millard, who will be leading us through this session that I was listening through the break that you are waiting for, and I'm also waiting for a lot. Thank you, David, for being with us.
Thank you, Paolo, for the invitation. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. I will invite our speakers to join the stage. Please be seated. Ruben, you can join us as well. Don't be shy. We have the opportunity to address a very exciting topic. And in the era we are living now, marked by rising religious nationalism and shifting political alliances, the tension between multilateral and corporation identity-driven sovereignty has never been more urgent. This session will now explore how religious nationalism challenges the principle of multilateralism, impacts human rights, particularly freedom of religion and beliefs, and reshapes global governance. Through diverse perspectives, we seek to understand whether these forces are irreconcilable or if pathways exist for constructive dialogue and coexistence. To introduce the subjects, I would like to present you our first speaker, Professor Rosa María Martínez de Codes. Her presentation is titled Discussion around Religious Nationalism, Multiculturalism, and the Use of Religious Freedom for Political Gain. Professor María Rosa Martínez de Codes is a professor at the University of Madrid. She's also Vice President of IRLA, Professor of American History, and from 1996 to 2002, she served as Deputy Director of Religious Affairs at the Spanish Ministry of Justice. She's a member of the Academia Europaea and the Honorary Committee of AIDLR. Her research addresses religious minorities, incitement to hatred, and secularism in Europe. Some of her publications includes Trends of Secularism in Pluralistic World, Secularizing Trends in Globalized World, and From Immigrants to Citizen. She will be joined by Fernando Soares Loja, Vice President of the Portuguese Religious Liberty Commission, and by Professor of Law and Political Science, Jeremy Gunn. We should have 4 speakers, but he won't be able to be with us today because he had a very important vote at the Romanian Parliament, and so please excuse his absence. With that cleared, and last but not least, we will have Ruben de Abreu for the commentary. With that cleared, I would like to invite Professor Rosa María Martínez de Codes to the stand for a presentation. Thank you.
Buenos días a todos. Good morning, everyone. Well, as far as I have no translation, I'm going to speak only 3 minutes, and I'm going to give my voice to Ruben de Abreu, who is so kind, who is going to read my paper, because I really can't talk longer than 5-10 minutes every time. Well, I only want to mention that the inspiration of my work today has to do with this, has to do with the last number that Paolo Macedo put in our hands last year. Some of the people who, Michael, Ibrahim, some of them were in that meeting, Jeremy too, James, Ricardo, yes. And he asked us to generate a new understanding of religious freedom and belief for the 21st century, confronting the challenges, confronting the problems. And then that was the inspiration for us in order to, and for him, of course, who did the effort and had the vision to generate this conference. It's a very particular conference with many authorized voices. All of you are authorized voices for all of us. And then we now, we try to contribute, and we try to get at the same time your spirit of your understanding and the way and how you try to protect or contribute to the defense of human rights and religious rights. Well, and now I started with the religious nationalism in this copy of the Journey 25, okay, last year, and wanted to put my aim in three different contexts, three different religious nationalist cases. India, you have it on the screen. I don't need to mention, because this is India, Israel, and United States. Three different understanding. This is the iconic, the symbolic, okay, of nationalists. This is what people know. This is what people see, the iconic of all what nationalists, religious nationalists mean in some way. I am talking for the mass media right now. And in my schedule and in my PowerPoint, you will see very simplify the concepts I want to transmit. That is the point. Because I want you to grasp the concepts. Because it's a theoretical framework, the one that I have tried now on this occasion to put into debate what is the significance of religious rights for religious nationalists. Understanding. Thank you so much. Thank you to my voice in this panel.
It's a very biblical situation. For those who are acquainted with the story, I'll be the Aaron of Moses. My presentation addresses the tension between multilateralism and religious nationalism through the specific lens of freedom of religious or belief or form. My basic claim is that some contemporary forms of religious nationalism should not be understood simply as stronger public religion, nor merely as a conservative reaction against secular modernity. They should be understood as alternative projects or of political legitimacy. Once we see them in those terms, the clash with multilateralism appears in a different light. It is no longer just a disagreement over policy preferences, legal accommodation, or cultural symbols. It becomes a conflict over the underlying criteria by which legitimate authority, rightful membership, and acceptable public norms are defined. More specifically, I argue that the multilateral form regime is challenged in two distinct but related ways. First, it is a challenge externally through familiar forms of sovereignty-based resistance. States limit oversight, resist intrusive monitoring, and insist on domestic discretion in areas they regard as politically sensitive. But second, and more importantly, for more argument, it is also challenged internally through what I call normative capture. By this I mean the process by which religious nationalism actors adopt, inhabit, and strategically redeploy the language of rights, especially religious freedom, in order to legitimize identity-based sovereignty claim and to entrench majoritarian hierarchies. a normative vocabulary originally designed to protect vulnerable individuals and minorities can thus be resignified and used by dominant groups. That, I suggest, is one of the central dilemmas of the contemporary Forbes regime. The presentation proceeds in 5 steps. First, I briefly reconstruct multilateralism as a universalist legitimacy regime. Second, I will explain why the encounter between multilateralism and religious nationalism should be understood as a problem of normative capture. Third, I clarify that I mean by religious nationalism as an alternative legitimacy project. Fourth, I illustrate the argument through 2 high-friction cases, India and Israel. And finally, I turn to the United States in order to show why even a formally non-confessional constitutional order can become a crucial site for the instrumentalization of Forbes. Let me begin then with the multilateral side of the problem. When I refer to multilateralism here, I do not mean only international organizations, diplomatic forums, or treaty systems in a narrow institutional sense. I use the term more broadly, as a normative and legal regime of legitimacy. In the field of religion and belief, the regime rests on at least 3 interlocking premises. The first is legal universalism. Rights belong to people as people, irrespective of their position within a majority culture, a dominant religion, or an inherited civilizational identity. In the fourth field, this means that the freedom to hold beliefs, to change them, to reject them, or to manifest them is not conditional on belonging to the majority faith or to the historical privileged tradition of a nation-state. Religious liberty, in this view, is not an ethic possession, nor a civilizational inheritance, and not a concession granted by the dominant community. It is a universal entitlement. The second premise is qualified state neutrality. I say qualified because multilateralism does not necessarily require a perfectly secularist state in the strict ideological sense, nor does it require the total exclusion of religion from the public life. What it does require is that the state does not transform one religion's ontology into the exclusive constitutional foundation of political membership. The state may regulate religion, cooperate with religious actors, and accommodate conscience, but it must not systematically distribute rights, voice, or status based on confessional belonging. In other words, the state must arbitrate among divergent convictions without collapsing citizenship into religious identity. The third premise is structural pluralism. Religious diversity is not treated merely as an unfortunate social fact to be managed or tolerated. It is treated as a political good that requires institutional protection. That protection may involve domestic constitutional guarantees, judicial reviews, proportionally analysis, minority protections, and, in some settings, also supranational standards and form of external scrutiny. The point is that pluralism is not led to be goodwill of transient majorities. It is juridified and institutionalized. This architecture has a clear legal expression. In the global sphere, Article 18 of the ICCPR protects both inner freedom of belief and the outward manifestation of religion or belief, while the Human Rights Committee distinguishes between the non-derogable internal forum that the conditionally limitable external forum. The Syracuse principles reinforce the idea that limitation must be construed strictly and must preserve the essence of the right. In Europe, Article 9 of the ECHR embodies a parallel logic. Freedom of thought, conscience, and religion is protected, while restrictions on manifestation are tightly bounded by legality and necessity. Taken together, these instruments encode a pluralist horizon. They seek to decouple political membership from religious identity and to protect both conscience and diversity against state or majoritarian coercion. At this point, however, we can already see vulnerability, precisely because multilateralism operates through universal legal categories. It is exposed to strategic reinterpretation. A regime based on universal rights must formulate its claims in general terms. It cannot say religious freedom belongs only to minorities, even if minorities were historically central to the regime's justification. I cannot say right language is available only to the weak, even if its moral energy often came from the defense of the weak. And this is where the problem begins. The universal vocabulary that gives form its normative strength also makes possible its appropriation by actors whose objectives are not pluralist or hegemonic. This takes me to the second part of the argument, the multilateralism, religious nationalism problem as a problem of normative capture. A growing body of scholarship rejects the older notion that religious nationalism is simply more religion in public. That description is too thin. It treats religious nationalism as a matter of visibility, intensity, or cultural rhetoric. But many contemporary cases show something deeper. Religious nationalism often seeks to reconfigure the state's legitimacy to rank political membership along religious or civilizational lines and to redefine the nation not merely as legal community but as a sacred or providential community. In that context, the tension with multilateralism is not accidental. It is built into the competing logic of legitimacy. Normative capture occurs when this alternative legitimacy project makes use of the right vocabulary to multilateralism, especially the language of form, to advance claims that are not primarily about protecting vulnerable conscience, but about consolidating majority identity. The crucial point is that form regimes were historically designed, above all, to shield individuals and minorities from coercive states or coercive majorities. Yet, the same doctrinal language can be mobilized by majoritarian actors to portray themselves as right-bearing victims, to depict constraints or their public power as discrimination, and to frame identity entrenching policies as form of religious liberty, cultural preservation, or non-discrimination. This becomes especially acute where religious nationalism advances what my paper calls a comprehensive theory of political legitimacy. Three features matters here. First, legitimacy is linked to divinely derived authority rather than resting fully on popular sovereignty or open-ended constitutional revision. Second, nationhood is defined in religious terms so that belonging is no longer primarily civic but confessional or civilizational. Third, the state is assigned a providential function. It becomes the guardian, custodian, or fulfiller of a religious national mission. When those three elements converge, religious nationalism ceases to be just a cultural preference. It becomes a rival framework for determining who belongs, who rules, and what justice demands. That is why I speak of a meta-political rivalry. The conflict is not only over outcomes, but over criteria. On the constitutional level, multilateralism is tied to amendable law, public sovereignty, and limitations on power, while religious nationalism tends to sacralize political foundations and to place certain identity commitments beyond ordinary contestation. On the civic political level, multilateralism presupposes an egalitarian concept of citizenship, whereas religious nationalism often differentiates between full members, preferred members, and tolerate minorities. On the legal moral level, universal rights confront forms of particularism grounded in revealed truth, sacred history, or inherited civilizational destiny. And on the symbolical level, pluralism clashes with projects and organized diversity, hierarchically tolerating minorities perhaps, but only within a framework dominated by the majority religious identity. This is the conceptual core of my argument. Once religious nationalism is understood as an alternative legitimacy project, the role of FORB becomes ambiguous. FORB can still function as a shield for conscience and diversity, but it can also become a repertoire through which majority identity projects are translated into rights language. The relevant question then is no longer simply whether religious freedom is being protected, but who is using that language, for what institutional purpose, and with what distributive consequences for belonging and equality. I begin with India, because India illustrates a pattern that is highly relevant for the multilateralism literature. Formal participation in multilateral forums can coexist with strong resistance to intrusive external constraints. India is an active player in the UN, the G20 and BRICS, and other sides of global governance. It seeks influence, voice, and recognition. But at the same time, it is deeply committed to preserving strategic autonomy and what policymakers and analysts often call police space. This means that India supports reform of the international order when reform will make that order more representative, but resist arrangements that will significantly narrow domestic discretion in political sensitive domains. This pattern is particularly important in FORB's context. India is, of course, subject to universalist rights commitment, including the ICCPR, but multilateral enforcement mechanisms in this area are comparatively weak, and conflicts about religion, citizenship, Secularism and national identity are therefore proceeded mainly through domestic constitutional politics. That institutional setting is consequential. It allows religious nationalism to present itself both as an expression of national culture and as a plausible claimant of religious freedom without facing a robust supranational counterweight of the kind one finds, for example, in the European human rights orders. The language of policy space is crucial here. In the Indian case, it can be understood as a practical expression of strategic autonomy. The state seeks greater agenda-setting power internationally while limiting the domestic cost of externally monitored commitment in combustible domains such as identity, religion, and territory. The paper notes that similar logic are visible in areas like trade and health, where flexibility and exceptions are defended as necessary to preserve distribute tools and administrative discretion. The underlying patterns is consistent, greater voice international coupled with caution towards intrusive commitments and would constrain sovereign room for maneuver domestically. The first two conditions intensify this selectivity. The first is the existence of sovereignty-sensitive territorial disputes, especially Kashmir. In such context, external scrutiny is easily framed as internationalization, and that framing raised the political cost of accepting binding oversight. The second is identified polarization, where national identity is increasingly articulated in civilizational or religious terms, multilateral rights norms becomes easier to portray as external imposition, foreign judgments, or elite cosmopolitan pressures that fail to respect national history and majority sentiment. The political consequences is that resistance to multilateral oversight can be recorded as a defense of democratic self-determination, civilizational integrity, or cultural authenticity.
Let me move to Israel right now.
Okay. Let me move to Israel right now, which is described as another high-friction context for somewhat different reasons. In the Israel case, the problem is not only ideological, it is also profoundly institutional. Comparative constitutional law helps here, and particularly Ron Hirsch's idea of constitutional theocracy, which capture hybrid settings in which constitutionalism, judicial review, and legal discourse coexist with strong religious tradition, so that identity disputes become constitutionalized and judicialized rather than simply resolved through ordinary politics. The Israeli case is analytically significant because it shows how religious nationalism can be stabilized not only culturally or electorally, but also through constitutional form, norm hierarchy, and judicial doctrine. My paper organized the Israeli case through three interrelated dimensions: security imperatives, legitimacy disputes, and constitutionalized identity. First, security is not merely one policy area among others. It is a structuring principle of Israel's statecraft. Persistent, external, and cross-border threats shape not only military and foreign policy choice, but also domestic political discourse and constitutional imagination. A policy governed under conditions of perceived permanent emergency develops a different relationship to identify borders and collective purpose than one operating under low-threat conditions. Security becomes part of the grammar through which legitimacy is narrated. Second, Israel operates under sustained legitimacy disputes in international and regional arenas. Question of recognition, Palestinian statehood, settlement borders, criticism, and boycotts are not peripheral. They directly affect the country's position within multilateral forums and shape how domestic actors understand the stakes of constitutional and legal conflict. The state is not merely defending its security, it's also defending its standing, its narratives, and its claim to legal and political legitimacy. Third, these external pressures are intervened with constitutionalized identity. Israel lacks a simple codified constitution, but it operates through basic laws with quasi-constitutional status. This means that identified disputes are channeled into conflicts over norm hierarchy, constituted authority, judicial review, and imperative power. The question is not just what the state does, the question is what the state is. A Jewish nation-state, a democratic state for all its citizens, or a permanently unstable combination of both.
And then we go to why does this matter? Next one. Why don't you drink water?
Okay. Why does this matter for my broader argument? Because Israel shows a plausible mechanism of normative capture, in particular sophisticated institutional form. First, national religious identity is constitutionalized. Second, rights discourse is mobilized to portray that identity as compatible with liberal standards. Third, in external forums, that compatibility can be articulated through categories legible to multilateralism itself: protection of conviction, non-discrimination, democratic self-definition, or self-determination. In this way, multilateralism may unintentionally provide rhetorical and doctrinal tools through which a majority identity project is translated into a right-based vocabulary, making it more difficult to classify from the outside as straightforwardly illiberal. Let me turn finally to the United States. At first glance, the United States may seem like an odd case to include in this framework. It is not a classic confessional state. The Constitution prohibits religious tests for office, and the First Amendment combines non-established with free exercise. The country, therefore, does not fit the model in which religious nationalism is directly constitutionalized as the official identity of the polity. And yet, precisely for that reason, the US case is highly revealing. It shows that the instrumentalization of form does not require formal confessional constitutionalism. It can also occur through shifts in constitutional doctrine, public symbolism, and institutional accommodation with a formally pluralism order. A useful starting point here is Robert Bella's concept of civil religion. Civil religion is not the same thing as Christian nationalism, but it helps explain the cultural background against which Christian nationalism became politically potent. Bella identified a public repertoire of myths, symbols, narratives, rituals, and providential language, national mission, sacrifice, chosenness, exceptionalism, that provide civic legitimation without fully collapsing into any one denomination. This symbolic infrastructure matters because it creates a bridge between generic civic sacredness and more substantive claims about Christian identity, national destiny, and public authority. Contemporary scholarship on Christian nationalism moved beyond private religiosity. The phenomenon is defined not as theology or church attendance, but as a cultural political framework that fuses America's civic life with the distinctively Christian identity. In this literature, Christian nationalism is a grammar of belonging. It helps define who counts as a true American, what moral order the nation is taught to embody, and which communities are perceived as central or peripheral to the polity. It is therefore not reducible to personal piety. It is a mode of national classification. A second strand of secularship emphasizes Christian nationalism as a boundary-making process. To say that the United States is a Christian nation is not merely a state of a religious preference, it is to draw a symbolic border around the nation itself. Historically, Christian culture density can then function as a form of social capital, turning shared symbols into criteria of belonging, status, and entitlement. That is why Christian nationalism has strong implications for how citizenship is secularly imaginated even before it becomes formal doctrine. As a third strand of scholarship identifies concrete empirical mechanisms. The paper highlights a growing consensus linking Christian nationalism to fear of ethnic outsiders, selective or hierarchical understanding of citizenship and rights, and support for populism or nativist political leadership. Other studies connect it to white identity, perceptions of ethno-racial threat, and in some recent work, even to greater tolerance for political violence or to heightened risk of religion minorities. The point is not that all research speaks with one voice, but that the cumulative pattern suggests that Christian nationalism functions as a culture-political device of belonging, hierarchization, and mobilization, not merely as a private religious preference. My work also noticed a more recent line of research on institutional translation. This asks how Christian nationalism moves from cultural framework to actionable political capacity. Elite cues matter. Organizational and media ecosystems matter. Strategic litigation matters. Subnational politics matters. In other words, Christian nationalism becomes more consequential, not simple when people hold certain beliefs, but when those beliefs are translated into legal claims, constitutional arguments, and policy demands. The United States, therefore, matters not because it reproduces the Israeli model and not because it mirrors India's strategic relationship to multilateral oversight, but because it demonstrates a third pathway. In the American setting, the instrumentalization of form occurs primarily through accommodationism, constitutionalism rather than through over confessional identity in the constitutional text. The result, however, can still be a reordering of public space, institutional authority, and practical hierarchies of belonging. Let me conclude by drawing comparative threads together. My argument has been that multilateralism in the fourth field is best understood as a universalist legitimacy regime structured around legal universalism, qualified neutrality, and structural pluralism. That regime remains normatively powerful, but it is also vulnerable. It is vulnerable not only to open rejection by sovereignty-conscious states, but also to internal re-signification. Religious nationalism, when understood as an alternative legitimacy project, is capable of appropriating the language of rights to advance identify-based sovereignty claims and to reorder hierarchies of belonging. The larger implication is that the challenge facing multilateral form regimes is not only how to enforce right against resistant states, it is also how to think doctrinally and conceptually about the possibility that the language of religious freedom can be used by dominant groups to secure public power, symbolic primary and legal insulation. Multilateralism does not address that possibility. It risks supplying part of the very vocabulary through which its universalist premises are narrowed, redirected, or hollowed out from within. So, the key analytical question in the end is not whether religion belongs in public life. That question is too simple. The real question is, under what condition does the language of freedom of religious or belief protect pluralism, and under what condition does it become a vehicle for majoritarian identity projects? That, I think, is where the multilateralism versus religious nationalism debate must now move. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. After addressing the danger of the use of religious freedom for political gain, I would like to present to you Fernando Soares Loja, Vice President of the Portuguese Religious Liberty Commission and member of the AIDLR Council of Experts. For over 30 years, he coordinated the law department of the Portuguese Evangelical Alliance and served as president of Advocates Europe, an international association of lawyers and magistrates. Please welcome. His subjects will be the state and communities' current legal issues for relevant public trends regarding religion. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'll try to be brief. When Paul, the apostle, wrote his first letter to the church in Thessaloniki, he encouraged the church by saying, "In all things be thankful," or "Be thankful in all circumstances." Not because of the circumstances, but despite the circumstances. And indeed, we are thankful to God despite the circumstances. Freedom of religion and belief is under attack. Religious communities are under attack, and so are its members. We cannot separate collective religious freedom from individual religious freedom. They are intertwined realities. So, when the government or institutions of the private sector undermine the freedom of religious communities, they also target its believers. You have heard of the recent decision of the Supreme Court of Japan that dissolved the Church of Unification, all the temples closed, and all the estate confiscated. We are still waiting to see whether Jehovah's Witnesses are going to face the same fate in Czechia. Apparently not for the time being, but some members of the government have mentioned their intent. And you have or you may have heard about Slovakia and its new law demanding at least 50,000 believers in order to get a religious community registered. And the French law that requires all religious communities to apply for a new registration each 5 years, or else. It's a new order advancing slowly, which brings to mind that metaphor of the frog in the pan. It is said that if a frog is placed in lukewarm water that is slowly heated, the frog will not perceive the danger and eventually will be cooked alive. It's a metaphor for the inability or unwillingness of people to react to threats that arise gradually rather than suddenly. And I have witnessed too often the unwillingness of community leaders to raise questions and defend the rights of their flocks. The Portuguese Religious Freedom Commission is an advisory body to the government and to the parliament that for the last 22 years have promoted and defended freedom of conscience, religion, and worship for all. Last January, we held a meeting with the most important religious communities in the country to hear from them. And they gave us a grim picture. I'm about to share with you a few examples. The Religious Freedom Act of 2001 requires from the municipalities to provide in their urban development plans adequate places for the religious communities to build their temples. This provision aims to solve a serious problem faced by all communities, some dioceses of the Roman Catholic Church included, to find suitable places for worship. After 25 years since the enactment of the law, from the 308 nationwide municipalities, less than 10 have complied with the law. Another situation. Settled religious communities, those who have more than 30 years in the country, may perform civil marriages within a religious ceremony. The wedding process begins at the civil registry office, and the law says exactly what documents should the future spouses bring with them to the registry office. The law is very clear, doesn't allow a second interpretation, but many spouses are required by the registry officers to provide documents that the law does not require from them, documents that they cannot provide, and therefore they have two options: to waive their right to a civil marriage performed by their religious leader within a religious ceremony in their community, or leave and find out another registry officer that abides by the law and requires nothing but the documents required by law. This specific law is now 25 years old and easy to read. Requiring further documents from future spouses, it is a way, in my view, to persuade them to waive their legal right to a civil marriage performed by their community. A last example concerning the government. Religious communities are exempt from taxes when they buy a building intended to be a place of worship. The value of the tax is 6.5% of the price, which is or may be a relevant amount of money. But the buyer needs to apply for the exemption before signing the purchase contract. And there is where the problem begins. The average amount of time it takes to get exemption from the tax department is just a mere 1.5 years. Therefore, if the church doesn't wish to lose the business, it will have to pay the tax and then wait 1.5 years or more for the reimbursement. I could give you another examples concerning the tax department, but we don't have the time. In Portugal, I think we have religious multilateralism according to the Constitution and the Religious Freedom Act. But some people are not comfortable with this reality, and they have expressed their views in an open way. One public officer who deals with the registration of religious communities have said to me more than once, "Why so many new churches? Isn't 1,000 enough?" When the registry office intends to refuse the application for registration of religious communities, they need the approval from the Religious Freedom Commission. Sometimes, when we take a look into the files that have been sent to us, we cannot understand why the registry wants to refuse the application. And we send the file back with the recommendation that the community should be registered. What might be the cause of this ill will? I'm not sure. In 25 years, 1,000 communities have been registered. Is that too much for a country of 10 million people? Many, let us say, native old churches remain unregistered as churches. They have legal personality as associations, and they seem to be happy with that. Is it because 20 or 30%, we don't know for sure, are foreign? Does this have to do with national identity? Many people feel threatened by so many Pakistanis and Bangladeshis and Brazilians in the streets of our cities. Some people suspect that religion is a business free of taxes. Some people are not happy that the government respects the principle of separation and declines to control the way the religious communities organize themselves, and that has no control over the income of these communities. This might be the cause for a social reaction against communities linked to migration. Now I am turning to the private sector. As we know, modern life is almost impossible without a bank account. Modern life is structured around digital transactions, direct deposits, and credit systems. So this makes the unbanked face serious hurdles in daily activities. I have received many complaints from religious communities in Portugal against banks' behavior lately, and it covers communities such as Chinese evangelicals, Russian Orthodox, Ukrainian Orthodox, and of course Portuguese communities, either Christians or Jewish. It doesn't matter the race, the nationality, or the confession. All religious communities are now under threat. All banks freeze clients' accounts when certain legal documents are not updated. That's fine, that's legal. What is not legal is the way banks deal with religious communities. Most of those banks ask one more document, and 1 week later they ask for another, and the next week they ask for another. And this goes on, this lasts for 2 months, 3 months. And during that time, the community cannot pay the bills, the rent, salaries, for its money is frozen. We have received reports of religious communities whose bank accounts have been frozen for 1.5 years, and the bank doesn't even return the money. Several communities have complained to us that some banks refuse to open accounts without explanation. In some cases, Communities have produced all required documents in order to open an account and wait for a year or so to no avail. No explanation is given. In some cases, when community representatives approach a bank asking to open an account, bank employees tell them very openly, "We won't open a bank account for you." No explanation. That's the way it is. This trend is becoming common practice in main banks in Portugal, private and public. I just heard that in Malta, the Seventh-day Adventist Church has been deprived from the only bank account the church have had for the last 5 years. With no notice and no explanation, the bank closed the account and returned the money. That's it. One can imagine the damage this have caused to the church and its day-by-day activity. Bureaucracy is a new tool of discrimination, should I say persecution, against religious communities. The Religious Commission in Portugal is going to meet with the central bank vice governor, but all the procedure will take time. We have realized that religious communities complain to us, the Commission, when we ask them if all is well. Otherwise, they don't complain, neither to us, neither to the central bank, nor to courts. This passive attitude doesn't help. It's important to be proactive and reactive when needed. Now, a word of hope, and we say hope is the last to die. Jewish communities have celebrated a few weeks ago Purim, as you know. They celebrate Esther, Queen of Persia, and Mordecai's courage to defend their people from genocide at the hands of the Persian Prime Minister, not Pezeskian, Haman. It was 500 years ago. The law that allowed the killing of Jews had been signed by the king, and it was irrevocable. The genocide process was underway. It took a man, Mordecai, who knew what was going on, and Esther, a woman close to the power, close to the authority, to prevent the plan from being carried out. Many of us, if not the king, we know at least someone who have access to the king and can make the difference to defend the threatened communities. That is what we intend to do. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for this review of the situation in Portugal. I could add that in France, for example, there are some issues with assurances as well. So maybe it's something that can be looked into. Our last speaker for this topic, I present to you Professor Jeremy Gunn, Professor of Law and Political Science at the International University of Rabat. He is a senior fellow at Emory University Center for the Study of Law and Religion. He holds a doctorate from Harvard University and from Boston University. He previously directed the program on freedom of religion and belief at the ACLU. Please welcome Professor Jeremy Gunn. His topic will be Christian Zionism in America and the emerging conflicts over religious freedom within the religious right. Thank you.
Okay. It will be in about 10, 15 minutes. So I'm pleased to be here. Thank Paolo for the invitation to participate, even if the clicker doesn't work. Because other people have made references to Toledo, I thought I should make a reference as well. When I taught a course on history of the Arab world, I would always introduce Toledo by saying, with a little bit of exaggeration and the lack of complete nuance, say Toledo was in fact the birthplace of the European Renaissance. It wasn't in the basements or the archives in Florence, it was in Toledo. And it began in a place about 300 meters from where we are sitting today, or standing as the case may be. It's the same location as where the cathedral is now. After Alfonso VI conquered Toledo, not such a nice thing if you're a Muslim, but after he conquered Toledo, he made a decision that later Muslims did not make, but to take this extraordinary archive, this extraordinary library of texts, principally in Arabic, but also in Hebrew, and to translate it into Latin. And it was the translation of the text in the School of Translation, 300 meters from where we're sitting today, that launched a rediscovery of the Greco-Roman world for Europeans. A major event in history. 12th century Renaissance was a direct descendant of that, but then 14th century Renaissance, 15th century was as well. So that began in Toledo. But often when we talk about the positive things, we forget some of the negative things. So because I'm a little contrarian, let's say the negative things as well. The place where that translation took place was in the madrasa, or in the mosque. Well, the mosque doesn't exist today because it was torn down to build a cathedral. So we have, on the one hand, something good, on the other hand, something that is not so good. I've been coming to Toledo for, I'm embarrassed to say this, for 50 years. And 50 years ago, the Islamic architecture that you can now see in Toledo was not visible. If you remember yesterday when we were in the Ayuntamiento, there was a wall that was partly taken down and you could see what was the Islamic framework of this building. And over time, over the last 50 years, part of the surface has been coming down in Toledo and we can see some of the underlying structures. I'm going off too long on this, sorry, but one of the other interesting things from Toledo is where we have the first examples of the horseshoe arch, which is often associated with Islam. So Islam is the horseshoe arch, which we can see throughout the world. Well, we actually have something before the Muslims that was here in Toledo. It was a church built by the Visigoths. So before the Muslims, before the Catholics, the Visigoths were here and built this architecture, adopted by Muslim, and it now becomes a symbol. We have this interaction of cultures, sometimes doing good things with each other and profiting, sometimes suppressing and destroying. So I always do this. Anyway, that's a little bit too long, but that's my statement on Toledo. I would like to begin, so I'm not going to count my time until I really begin. I'd like to tell you two stories, one of which I think probably most of you have already heard, one of which I am sure none of you has heard. So first story, Chairman Mao Zedong was asked the question, this is the one you've all heard, was asked the question, what do you think of the French Revolution? And he said, it is too soon to tell. Okay, story one. Story number two took place in Wittenberg, Germany, or what is now Germany, in Wittenberg in November of 1517. And I know you don't know this story because I'm making it up right now. So in November of 1517, people were meeting in a bar, a public house. People who looked just exactly like you, and someone who looked just like me walked in and said, I'm a shopkeeper here in Wittenberg, and I saw something very interesting on Halloween a month ago. And I saw this priest this monk go up and text 95 theses on the door. Now, it's partly apocryphal, but I saw him do this. And I think, this person who looked like me said in this story, I think that this is really important. This is not just a little expression of dissent. This is something that is going to profoundly shake the Catholic Church. It's going to splinter it into 1,000 pieces. And the people in the public house looked at him a little skeptically. And then he continued, not only is this going to shatter the Catholic Church over time, or lead to that, it's also going to change the political map of Europe. Countries are going to come into existence. They're going to fight over what religion means, and it's going to change Europe. And people look at him a little skeptically. Someone who knows the story of Mao Zedong says, remember what Mao Zedong said? It's too soon to tell. A Frenchman there said, remember what Talleyrand said? Surtout pas trop de zèle. So can't quite believe it. But now with that, now taking after this person in this pub in Wittenberg, Germany in 1517, I would like to suggest to you something like that is happening right now, even as we are sitting here in this room, that is happening inside the United States, that I think is very important. Now, time will tell. I might be wrong. If we come back next year, I might come in wearing sackcloth and ashes in penance. But I think something is happening. Now, I've handed out a couple of pages. If you don't have it, you can make reference. If you don't have it, you can, Professor Idrisi can hand you a copy of it. Those are some notes. I have included terms, because I'm going to use some of the terms. I'm not going to go through and define them, but if you want to see what I mean when I am using terms such as Zionism, you can see that in this document. But I'm going to follow through the first 2/3 of the page to try to explain some things that I think that are happening in the United States that are profound and will change not only religion in the United States, but conceivably change politics in the world. Let me offer first a general thesis, and I want to put this in context with what Rosa María has presented. And you're all lucky that Rosa María presented first, because she gave a very sophisticated and nuanced version of what I'm about to do in a more in a different way. So I think that when religion and politics merge together, and they have always interacted with each other, and I'm sure they always will, but the more that religion becomes involved in politics, or the more that politics becomes involved in religion, the more corrupt both institutions become. Politics is bad for religion, in my belief. I'm not going to argue all of that. And I think that politics is bad for religion. Both of them are corrupted the closer they are together. In my opinion, religion has an extremely important, what I will call, using the context of the Hebrew Bible, prophetic role. It is the role of religions to say to the state, you are lying, you are deceiving, you are being corrupt. You are not treating the poor with dignity. That's the role for religion, not for the religion to come and seize control of the mechanisms of the state and then institute policies. When states do that, and I'm looking at you, Iran, problems will happen. When Saudi Arabia does that, problems happen. Problems happen inside the United States, in my opinion, when this happens. So religion can play an invaluable role related to politics, but it's not by seizing the political power, and it's not by the political institutions taking religion and using it to advance a political agenda, but it's when they have a healthy relationship with each other. So that's my underlying thesis, hypothesis, approach. Now, on the outline that I gave to you, I'm going to talk about just a few things. I'm going to do it briefly. I'm going to emphasize a couple of things on that sheet. But first, we'll take this concept of what that I have identified as religious right. And that's a fluid term. I think religious nationalism or Christian nationalism, not exactly the same thing, but it would be a part of what is happening with what I'm using the term religious right. Sometimes it will be called Christian right, but that means Jews are excluded from it. If it is religious right, Jews are excluded in terms of how I am using this term. As an organized movement, loose coalition of organizations. We can pretty easily date it to 1979. Now, these interests existed beforehand. We can say these interests go back to 17th century America, but it was really formed in 1979, and it was formed with the express purpose, and it's very clear, this is not my imagining, for the purpose of electing Ronald Reagan president of the United States. So conservative Catholics, conservative Protestants, conservative Jews met together and said, let's form a coalition, and we are going to use religion as a way of helping to elect this person who falls into our political beliefs. This coalition, loose coalition, sometimes more formal, sometimes not, which begins in 1979, has been one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful, political blocs in the United States, that's BLOC, since 1979. It has not always prevailed with times of presidential elections. There are times when it lost, typically when it was divided amongst itself. When it has come together and is relatively united, then it typically wins elections. It also is particularly powerful in elections for Congress and Senate. It is not all powerful. I would say maybe it is 40% of the American population, maybe 80% of the conservative part of the religious population, or the 80% of the population of the conservatives in the United States. But it's very influential. Typically, some of its calling cards are, and the issue that rallied them to begin with was opposition to abortion, something that Protestants in the United States had not taken a position on prior to 1979. If you talk to Protestant conservatives in the United States, that will be a fundamental defining aspect of their religious beliefs. Well, this fundamental defining aspect of their religious beliefs began in 1979. It wasn't there when the Supreme Court decided Roe v. Wade in 1973. It was a created issue, which then infiltrated, if that's the right term, or entered into the religious beliefs. So it went from being political, controversial issue to fundamental part of our religious beliefs. And we can date exactly when that happened, and we have people who talk about being there when that happened. So this is not my simple interpretation. Other issues that it is traditionally supported is opposition to homosexuality, more recently transgenderism. As homosexuality began to be more and more accepted publicly, the issue of sexuality, then that became the defining issue, and you see that in the rhetoric in the United States. Another issue was Islam, and it was opposition to Islam, often using terms terrorist, Palestinian, Islam, synonymously as threats to the United States. Again, this is I'm not saying a majority of Americans, but this is certainly a hefty plurality and maybe approaching a majority. One person who is particularly important in this movement, more important now, is a person named John Hagee, and he said, "We believe that for Christians," let me hold off on that for a second. The other element of this coalition has been support for the state of Israel. So that there's a long story of how that began largely in the 1960s. Prior to the 1960s, we would say most who would now be affiliated with what is called the political right would have been considered to be either modestly or virulently anti-Semitic. So there's been a change within this group, but it has now become an extremely strong supporter of the state of Israel. So John Hagee, and now to the right point, said, "We believe that for Christians, standing with Israel," now, Israel is a state, standing with Israel is a biblical mandate and a moral imperative. So as abortion became part of our beliefs as Christians, so the state of Israel, not Judaism, the state of Israel became an important part of our religion. And that has dominated politics in the United States since the 1970s. There are more details, but I will skip over that. So we get now to what is the second point on the chart that I gave you, and to suggest that within this group that has largely been working together not always in harmony, always fissures, always dissenters within this group, but largely a cohesive group since 1979. There is now a split in this group, and there is a civil war that is taking place. I don't know what the percentages are on the other sides, but I am now seeing things within this group that I have never seen, that I have not seen since the formation of this. So this is new. This is happening. Now, I might be wrong. This might not last very long. I suspect with the rhetoric that I'm seeing that this is something that is not going to disappear soon. The issue that began this rupture in the religious right in the United States was the Israeli assault on Gaza. And so people in the religious right who think of themselves as being good, God-fearing Christians look at this and say, this is, and I'm using their word now, this is genocide. And the idea that people in the religious right in the United States would be accusing Israel of genocide is, the world is split up. It doesn't make any sense. This could not possibly be happening. Israel, the state of Israel, responded very negatively to the attacks by conservative Christians to this genocide. And the Israeli government and the Israel lobby in the United States started accusing religious right people who referred to Gaza as genocide. They started calling them anti-Semites, thereby, in my opinion, degrading the horror of anti-Semitism and trying to confuse anti-Semitism, which I try to give some explanation of, as something like dislike, hatred, prejudice against Jews, either as a religion or as an ethnic group. I'm not going to get into that issue. We'll let the Israelis deal with that one. But with that going into that particular merging anti-Semitism, which is a horrible thing, and is the cause of the Holocaust and other things, to take that and say a political disagreement with the state of Israel about committing genocide, that's anti-Semitism. The rhetoric now within the religious right, which I'm following too much to the agitation of my stomach, it is now being stated is, if we are anti-Semites by opposing genocide in Gaza, then call us anti-Semites. What Israel is doing is cheapening that word, the term anti-Semitism. And anti-Semitism has been one of the most powerful rhetorical terms that Jews, the Israeli lobby in the United States, and the state of Israel have used during the last 30 years, not only in the United States, where it's been effective, but throughout Europe. To say that to oppose some action of the state of Israel as anti-Semitic makes states step back. Germany is a particular case for very understandable historical reasons, don't want to be called anti-Semite. So Israel has used that term. It is becoming progressively less effective, and I predict within the next year it's largely going to go away, at least in the United States, of having any kind of moral value. Let me try a quotation as time is running. Well, actually, I haven't started my time yet. Just for 1 second, I want to read one quotation. Okay, so this is a conversation that took place a couple of days ago, and this was by two people who were among the earliest religious supporters of Donald Trump for president. So they were all in, and before the evangelical community in the United States came to endorse Donald Trump, these were two supporters of them. So this is Milo Yiannopoulos, if you care. If you don't care, that's fine. Where he says, he will be somebody who will be extremely well known among all of the people of the religious right as an influencer. He's not in political position. It is a shame that for once the young people in this country have more of a moral compass than the old, which is not true of every electorate all the time. Maybe it's more true than we like to admit as conservatives. Israelis, your time has come. Your time is running out. You're on borrowed time, as it is. He makes reference to a particularly famous Israeli spokesman. Pretty much every American president has proven their toughness credentials by murdering a few Muslims. I mean, a few million. Every American president that comes into office wants to let people know they're serious, and thereafter kills a few million Muslims over and over again. Is it any wonder that some of them have opinions about America that they may have? Now, that might not be an extraordinary point of view. It would be shared certainly by people on the far left in the United States. The fact that this is coming from this particular person within this context means something has changed in the United States. Back to being on time. Okay, it's fine. Okay, so we could do more with that. I want to talk about two issues specifically within this change on the right. One of them has to do with the assassination of Charlie Kirk. If you've heard about that or not, there's a different point of view on that. And I'm sure I'm running out of time, though I'm trying not to look at that. So Charlie Kirk was a person, he was assassinated in September of 2025. At the time he was assassinated, he was one of the most highly respected voices in the conservative right of the United States. He was widely credited for having affected the election of Donald Trump as president. He was a very strong supporter of Donald Trump. He was recognized as a supporter of the state of Israel. His organization, Turning Point USA, was probably the most influential political organization for the Republican Party in the United States, other than the Republican Party. So this is not just some incidental figure. This is someone who is very important. So he is assassinated. The first person, note this carefully, the first person who comes out to say how regretful he is of this assassination is Benjamin Netanyahu. So it's not an American politician, it's Netanyahu. And you might think, why is Netanyahu the first person to comment on this? And Netanyahu says that Charlie Kirk was a great friend of Israel, and I, Benjamin, invited him to come to Israel, but now he will not be able to come. And the argument became that Charlie Kirk was killed by a person who was homosexual and had a transsexual lover and was on the political left. Okay, so that's the initial story, and a story that's still believed probably by a majority of Americans, and it may be true. I don't know what really happened. But that's the story that came out. Charlie Kirk is killed by the left, and he is a supporter of Israel, and this is a tragedy for Israel, and we now need to come together as conservative Americans, support this organization. Within a week of his death, there is a funeral that is held that looks more like a political rally. I'll spare you the details on that, but somewhere between $250 and $500 million is raised within a month after Charlie Kirk is assassinated, because these are conservatives getting together to try to bring together, to hold together what I'm calling the religious right. Within a week after the assassination, one of Charlie's closest friends said, I'm not buying this story. I don't think it was a homosexual that killed Charlie Kirk. And her name is Candace Owen. She doesn't say exactly who killed, but she said, I'm going to start telling you the story. One, Charlie Kirk announced the day before he is assassinated, September 9th, that he had changed his position on Israel because of the inappropriate political pressure that had been put on him by his religious right donors and his Israeli donors. So he has had it now with Israel. He's going to change his position. Remember, Benjamin Netanyahu is very concerned that he's losing the religious right in the United States, and the number one person to help is Charlie Kirk, most influential, and Charlie Kirk is assassinated. Now, okay, that's a coincidence that the biggest spokesman is assassinated. But Charlie Kirk has changed his position on Israel. He is now going to start using the term genocide to describe what Israel is doing. That's a catastrophe for Benjamin Netanyahu, and Charlie Kirk says it the day before he's assassinated. He also says the day before he's assassinated, September 9th, they are going to kill me. So who's he talking about? And his supporter, Candace Owen, says, he's not talking about this transsexual lover who comes from St. George, Utah. That's not what he's talking about. He's talking about these powerful political donors who are supporting the state of Israel and who are contributing to this organization. Now, this issue, whether conspiracy, whether not conspiracy, this has profoundly split the conservative right. And I would estimate of maybe the 10 most influential spokesmen for the religious right in the United States, these are not official government positions, but podcasters and influencers, out of the top 10, 10 have switched from supporting Israel and to believing that Charlie Kirk was killed as a result of a conspiracy. Again, whether there's a conspiracy or not, I don't know. But the fact that a significant number of people believe it, and there's a lot of additional evidence as well, which we don't have time for here, if that's true, that splits up the political right in the United States. And so that's part of what's happening. I'm skipping over all these things. Okay. Last thing, which is, I don't know how much patience you have, is... Go ahead, we have patience. Okay. So Charlie Kirk is assassinated on September 10th. On September 27th, September 27th, someone do the math for me. What's 27 minus 10? 17 days later, the Israeli government files a document in the United States Department of Justice under the Foreign Agents Registration Act. I have a copy of it here, and I'm going to show you some pages of it. So this is Israeli government action. So if they're going to try and promote some particular cause in the United States, they need to register with the Department of Justice, and they registered on September 27th. And one of the documents that is part of this Israeli registration is the document that's attached here, Show Faith by Works, a Christian education and Israeli information campaign. Campaign. Okay, sorry. I should get out my... Okay, so what is this? And this is an activity that is designed to disappear.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, Paulo.
You better talk.
Okay, this is it. Okay, so this is Israeli government's plan for the United States. What they're going to do is target Christian churches. This is in 5 states initially. Conservative Christian churches, and they're going to start this program. They're concerned about low American evangelical Christian approval of the nation of Israel. So we, the Israeli government, are going to target Christian churches in the United States and try to improve our image with the Christian churches. And we're going to use, we, the Israeli government, are going to use biblical arguments to highlight the importance of Israel and the Jewish people to Christians. So next page. Our goals include, as you can see there, use a combination of personal and professional outreach to the Christian community, combined with positive associations with the nation of Israel, while linking Palestinian population with extremist factions. So the Palestinians are not this people of whom there is a dangerous faction within the Palestinians. The Palestinians are dangerous. The Israelis are the friends of American Christians. The politicians are the enemies. If you look at the last line, you'll see a reference to comprehensive digital targeting using geofencing. So if you are among the lucky people in the world who don't know what geofencing is, I'm about to make you unlucky because I'm going to tell you what it is. It is using electronic surveillance equipment to be able to capture cell phone information from audiences. And the plan for the Israeli government, if I haven't stressed that this is Israeli government, let me know and I will try to stress Israeli government, is going to go into Christian churches, get cell phone information, and then start sending targeted messages to Christians about what the Bible says about Israel. So the Israeli government will use propaganda techniques in order to be able to shape the notion of what Christianity means to Christians. Now, when we think typically of human rights, we think of what we need to do is restrict the state from interfering with people's religious activity, so that the state needs to step back. Well, this is something not exactly contemplated. This is when the state decides not to go in and suppress a particular group, but to go in and propagandize a particular group in order to support their political agenda, including a war in Iran, including the invasion of Gaza. Okay, the next page. Okay, so if you look at the last one here, you can look at all of them, but the last one to emphasize here, what we want to do as the Israeli government is we want to give the message that that there are Christians in Israel and the birthplace of the Jesus Christmas message. So we are going to associate Israel with Jesus, with Christmas for the Christian churches, and we're going to encourage them to come. Next slide. Those were the pro-Israeli messages. Now we have the anti-Palestinian state. So going near the bottom, Hamas and the Palestinians have killed many of the American Christian aid workers and distributing food in the region. There are a lot of videos of IDF killing people who are distributing food, but they're going to present the message. Now, they're not saying we need to make sure that there is a balanced message, and we want to make sure people have all the information, but we're going to choose our audience, those who are most likely to support us, and who just need to be reminded how much they support us. We can go on. This entire document is 86 pages, and I don't have 86 minutes, but you get the idea. The other thing that has completely affected the religious right in the United States is the invasion of Iran, which it still has majority support within the religious right, but is now a sharply divisive issue. So the war in Iraq in 2002, 2003 was not a divisive issue in the religious right. The war in Iran is a divisive issue. I expect that there is going to be a long-term effect on this. So you have on the outline, I will now try to summarize here. I think we are already seeing, and we will continue to see, a significant reduction of the pre-2025 religious right political power. That will have an effect on religion inside the United States, and it will have an effect on United States actions outside the United States, which might be of more interest to you. They have undermined the Christian consensus. One of the arguments that's been used by conservative Catholics in the United States is they will say, we are not Zionism, we are against Zionism on religious grounds. Now, whether that's Catholic doctrine or not, we can have a debate about that, but that is what many of these people will be saying is Zionism is anti-Catholicism, and in the name, and this is the term that becomes important, in the name of our religious freedom as Catholics living in the United States, we should not have a state that is supporting, the United States should not be supporting the state of Israel for our religious freedom. Now, we're getting in a new dimension of what religious freedom means when arguments like that are made. When one Catholic who was named Carrie Prejean Bowler was on a commission established by President Trump on religious freedom, she made that statement. She was fired the next day. So everyone on this commission is religious right. A Catholic says, Zionism is against my religion, it's against my freedom of religion. When the state promotes that, she is removed from the commission. So is that a violation of her religious freedom? Right. This is going to be a sharply reduced influence of the religious right in the United States, on the Israel lobby in the United States. And the other one, which all of these I wish I had time to develop, is the argument about our religion tells us that we should be doing something. In the name of God, we should be supporting this policy or another. Those arguments are now being used against each other inside the religious right. Instead of those arguments being used to attack the political left or liberals or secularists, they're now being used saying, how can you have these phony pastors standing up and telling me I should support Zion? They are liars, they are cheaters, they are corrupt. That's a new language inside the religious right, and I think there's going to be significant consequences. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As you can see, my moderating skill is as good as my English, so we are sorry for the delay. I would like to invite Ruben de Abreu, Vice President of AIDLR, for a conclusion. He has 4 minutes, and yes. And then after that, you will be free to go and eat until 1:40 p.m. Thank you.
I gave myself the freedom to reorganize the order in which I refer to any presentation, to my logic and my understanding of the subject. In my perception, what emerges from the three presentations is not a single issue, but a convergence of tensions shaping the future of religious freedom in our world. Across different contexts, conceptual, political, practical, I will say operational, we have seen the freedom of religion and beliefs is no longer a stable or self-evident principle. It has been reinterpreted, contested, and in some cases, quietly eroded. From the presentation of Professor Rosa María Martínez de Codes, we were invited to rethink the very framework through which we understand religious freedom. We often assume that religious freedom is inherently protective, especially for minorities and vulnerable individuals, but we were reminded that this assumption is no longer sufficient. Through the concept of normative capture, we see that the language of right, particularly the language of religious freedom, can be appropriated and redirected. What was designed to protect it can also be used to legitimize power. What was intended to preserve pluralism can, under certain conditions, be mobilized to reinforce identity, hierarchy, and exclusion. This challenge, one of the deepest convictions of modern democracy and in our societies, that universal rights naturally lead to justice. We are now confronted with a more complex reality. Rights are no longer only a principle, they are also instruments, and their meaning depends on who uses them and for what purpose. This brings us to the perspective of Professor Jeremy Gunn, where these dynamics take a concrete and even dramatic form. The international fragmentation of the religious rights in the United States illustrates how religion, when closely aligned with political power, becomes vulnerable to its own contradictions. What we see is not merely a political division. It's, in my opinion, a deeper crisis of identity, a movement that once appeared unified around shared moral and religious convictions is now divided by questions of coherence, credibility, and allegiance. When faith becomes intertwined with the geopolitical interest or partisans, loyalties, tensions, and inevitably arise. The moment moral convictions and political strategies no longer align, fracture appears. And this raises an essential question, not only in the United States, but for all of us. Can religious communities maintain moral credibility when their witness is perceived as dependent on political alliances? This is not simply a question of strategy. In the end, it's a question of integrity. The perspective presented by Dr. Fernando Soares Loja grounds this reflection in everyday reality. It shows us that the challenge to religious freedom are not always visible in grand ideological conflicts. Often they take shape in administrative decisions, legal procedures, or bureaucratic practice. On a private note, and as a pastor, I really appreciate that the fact that the lawyer began his presentation citing Paul the Apostle. The metaphor that was shared, the frog is slow-eaten water, is particularly striking. It reminds us that the greatest danger are not always those who arrive suddenly, but those who advance gradually, almost imperceptibly. We see the religious freedom today is challenged in three interconnected levels. Conceptually, through the redefinition and appropriation of its meanings, politically, through its instrumentalization and the internal crisis of religious actors, and practically through administrative and bureaucratic limitations. This leads us to what may be the central insight of this conference. Religious freedom is no longer only a question of protection, it's a question of purpose. What is religious freedom for? Is it a shield that protects the dignity of every individual and the diversity of every community? Or can it become a language through which power is justified, boundaries are reinforced, and others are excluded? As we conclude, we are not simply left with concerns. I think we are left with responsibility. Responsibility for scholars and educators to clarify concepts and expose distortions. Responsibility for leaders to act with integrity and courage. Responsibility for communities to remain vigilant and faithful to the deeper values they profess. The future of religious freedom will not be secured by legal framework alone. It will depend on the moral clarity within which it is defended, the integrity with which it is practiced, and the courage with which it is upheld, especially when it is inconvenient or costly. The future of religious freedom will depend not only on protecting it from external threats, but on preserving its own soul, so that it remains a freedom for all and not a privilege for some. Thank you very much.